applied ethics and human rights. Discussion of stem cell research, abortion, assisted suicide, gay rights, animal rights, and children's rights, with the subdivision of children's rights into religious indoctrination, physical punishment, and circumcision. This applied ethics and human rights lecture will deal with 6 controversial issues, several of them in the field of bioethics and the contentious discussions brought about by advances in biology and scientific research. Bioethics is a large field with topics such as body modification, human experimentation, chimeras, circumcision, gene therapy, and much more. Beauchamp and Childress's book, Principles of Biomedical Ethics, referenced in the bibliography handout, is the Bible to consult on bioethics. Philosophy, particularly ethics, is more important than before as ethical issues emerge with the advances in technology and science and their impact on the human. Moral issues intersect with scientific advances, and debates arise as to the use of drugs for brain enhancement, surgery for epilepsy, and so on. Neuroethics is an emerging field that professionals think will have a large effect on such far-reaching issues as law and justice. There are 4 areas of guidelines for bioethics as agreed upon by most federal agencies and professionals in the medical fields. They are non-maleficence, beneficence, autonomy, and justice. Non-maleficence is the principle of do no harm to the patient, the concept going back to Hippocrates, a Greek physician born in 460 BCE. Autonomy recognizes the right of the patient's values and wishes regarding medical practices performed. Beneficence is a motivation to provide medical services to patients, and justice is to remind practitioners that the fundamental respect for human dignity requires basic medical services be made available to all. Central to the controversies involved in stem cell research, abortion, and assisted suicide are the deep differences between the religious and secular communities on the belief in the soul, a supernatural entity. Belief in the soul explains the development and unique qualities of each individual from the moment of birth and is enmeshed in ideas of punishment and reward after the death of the body. Religious objections to the above practices are tied to the belief that the soul is present in the human body from the moment of conception until the last breath of the person. Religious fundamentalists believe that because of the human soul, the right to life is a foundational right of human beings. Secular persons have no belief in the hypothetical concept of a soul, but are most interested in a humane outcome in individual cases. Many secular people are for rights to abortion, stem cell research, and assisted suicide, along with regulation. These issues have become entangled in a system of beliefs, misinformation, confused opinions, and general lack of knowledge. Stem cell research. Stem cells are extracted directly from embryonic cells before those cells begin to differentiate. There are about 100 cells in a blastocyst. A large percentage of these cells are stem cells which can be kept alive and double every few days. A replicating set of stem cells from a single blastocyst is called a stem cell line. The importance of these cells is that they are non-specialized cells which can create specific cells such as blood, brain tissue, or muscle cells. Stem cell research has the potential to one day help with the diseases of Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and spinal cord injuries. Many parents now make use of in vitro fertilization and create many embryos with no intent that everyone will become a child. After normal sexual intercourse, 60 to 80 of embryos generated by the union of sperm and egg spontaneously abort. Michael Gazzaniga, a noted neuroscientist who served on the President's Council on Bioethics, believes that extrauterine embryos do not deserve the moral status of a human person. He explains that a clump of cells is not a human being. He states that a baby in the womb cannot live outside that environment until week 23 of a pregnancy, and the brain as well is not viable until week 23. Many research scientists feel that research on fetuses should obey the 14-day cutoff which ethical researchers now employ. 14 days marks when no twinning can occur, and the zygote is a cemented individual. This is the time when the primitive nervous system develops. Most secular people believe that what makes a human being is the interaction between genes and environment. Religious fundamentalists are interfering with a research project with possible potential because of their belief in an immortal soul and their misunderstanding of biology. They have no real answer to the question of the chimera and the soul. Chimeras have certain characteristics of two embryos fused into a single ball of cells, which are capable of being implanted and which develop into a complete human being. Both those embryos, according to Christian doctrine, had a soul at the instant of fertilization. They should be impossible to fuse into one soul. Let us hope that one day religious fundamentalists will understand and learn enough concerning stem cell research to stand aside and allow science to decide on the merits or failure of using stem cells for human flourishing. Abortion. Much the same controversy as that of stem cells entangles the issue of abortion in the United States, with the same degree of misinformation, irrational passions, and misunderstanding. Many atheist and secular individuals are pro-abortion. This preface will discuss the termination of a pregnancy by surgical or medicinal intervention resulting in the death of the fetus. Such techniques are called therapeutic abortions. In the United States, the religious right has waged a long campaign to limit or completely abolish abortions. At present, Roe v. Wade still stands, but is in danger of being repealed. Roe v. Wade, decided by the Supreme Court of the United States in 1973, determined that a woman's right to privacy under the Due Process Clause in the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution extended to an abortion. Nearly all abortions in the United States take place in the first trimester. A fetus cannot survive outside the mother even at 5 or 6 months old because its nervous system is not fully developed. Fetuses which are developed for in vitro fertilization are routinely thrown out. Abortions are a safe procedure, with 88% of them taking place in the first trimester with 0.05% of complications. No medical or psychological association, including the American Psychological Association, has found any post-abortion syndrome. The stress involved in an unwanted pregnancy is highest before the abortion. Only 8% of women who have abortions do so because they use no birth control regularly. Many medical schools in the United States do not offer instructions to students about conducting an abortion. In many rural areas and in some states, abortion is restricted because women do not have access to abortion services. Doctors who perform this service are in fear of their lives from threats by anti-abortion foes. We have freedom of religion in the United States, including freedom from religious law. Religious laws do not take precedence over government laws in our country. It is hoped that more abortions can be performed safely with medicinal techniques, and that people use condoms more regularly. Even with such measures, access to abortion will be necessary. A new report in February 2011, issued by the federally financed National Domestic Violence Hotline, states that 1 in 4 women who agreed to answer questions after calling the hotline said a partner who was already abusing them had pressured them to become pregnant, using such tactics as forcing the women to have unprotected sex, flushing birth control pills down the toilet, and poking holes in condoms. These statistics are not from a formal study, but are based on a survey of about 3,000 women. Many of the religious right are also opposed to contraception, which adds tension to the issue. Surely a future where children are always desired and treated well, in which every human that comes into this world wanted and loved, should be the goal of a humane and rational country. Assisted suicide and euthanasia. Central to the debate over assisted suicide and euthanasia is a concern for the absolute sanctity of human life. Most religious fundamentalists and some moral thinkers take the position that neither of these measures should ever be permitted. The slippery slope argument is the fear that the disabled will be pushed to an exit that they do not desire, as many disabled people are grateful to be alive and do not believe that their quality of life can be measured by utilitarian standards of happiness. People who are ill and the elderly fear that with health costs soaring in the United States, they will be pushed to suicide without their consent. They think of voluntary suicide as a halfway house to death without consent. Voluntary euthanasia or assisted suicide takes place when a patient is fully conscious and able to request his or her own death. In these cases, people are terminally ill, many of them in hospices, and or in great pain and unable to die naturally. As they are conscious and rational, many in the secular community believe their decision to die should be honored. At present, 3 states in the United States have legalized assisted suicide: Oregon, Washington, and Montana. The patient's condition is monitored by several doctors and other witnesses. The state of Oregon has policies in place that protect the patient and yet give him or her freedom to choose the final exit. Coma patients and people who are not conscious create more difficult decisions. Unless they have left a living will or directive, the question of who will make the decision is a tangled one. Frequently, a decision is made when the brain dies. There is actually no debate when the loss of brain function causes life to cease. While practices differ from country to country, they all involve the question of who makes the call of brain death and what tests should be used to determine it. But most cultures have quite similar definitions of brain death. Most of the arguments against euthanasia and the right to die do not seem to hold up under rational analysis. Nazi Germany had death camps because of doctrines of racial purity, not because of liberal assisted suicide laws. If there are clearly understood and enforced rules, as in Oregon, slippery slopes can be avoided. It seems reasonable that a person has a right to choose to die with dignity rather than in pain, suffering, and depression. The right to assisted suicide should be a fundamental freedom for each citizen. Secular philosophies focus on the quality of life, the capability to lead what can be considered, even from a subjective standpoint, worthwhile lives. Gay rights. If a male lies with a male, as he lies with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them. Leviticus 18:22, the Old Testament of the Christian Bible. Gay rights is another cultural area where the religious right has been active in attempting to regulate sexuality. As in the abortion issue, power and control over people's bodies and sexual preferences seem to be a component of religious desire for restrictive laws.